I want to welcome you to our fourth speaker. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dick McNeil, and I have the good fortune of teaching marketing, and I also work with a team of business professionals like Dean Donna Mayo in orchestrating the Cottrell Speaker Series. On behalf of Dean Mayo, I want to extend each of you a warm welcome, and I want to thank you for coming. I know each of you are excited about today's speaker. She's at the top of the pyramid of Newell Rubbermaid. And I can assure you of one thing. You're in for a real educational treat. Her resume reads like a who's who. Her career with international icons like S.C. Johnson, My First Love, the Coca-Cola Company, and Newell Rubbermaid has afforded her an opportunity to assume key leadership positions in major markets around the world. Penny is unique in one respect. She is a card-carrying globetrotter. She's either lived or worked in every region of the globe, except I think she said Antarctica, but I'm going to give her credit for Antarctica because I did a little research and learned she's flown over Antarctica about 5 times. Penny has earned a unique reputation as a business leader. That's one heck of an accomplishment. And she's a role model that other business leaders want to emulate. Her leadership is credited with producing business results both internationally and domestically that other leaders only dream about. Bottom line, Penny is the best of the best. Penny is here to discuss a topic of great and growing importance, how brands can thrive in the international arena. And she's eminently qualified to discuss the topic because she's done it, and she's always done it in an exemplary manner. So join me in giving Penny a warm North Georgia welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm a little bit blushing from that. I mean, that's a little bit much to live up to, but thank you very much, Dick, for that. You guys have a beautiful campus up here. It's a real gem, and it's a bit of a secret, so I think your marketing department needs to do a little bit of work on getting that more well known. As Dick has mentioned, I'm here to talk about international branding, and I'm not going to do that in a professorial lecturing kind of way. I think that you guys probably have enough of that in your classes, although I'm sure your professors are great. So what I'm going to do is spend my time talking to you about some stories about what I've learned and the mistakes that I've made and the successes that I've had, and hopefully you'll be able to learn something from that as well. And then the last 20-25 minutes I'm going to leave open to questions and answers, either on the topic of today, or if you have some general questions around business and marketing, I'd be happy to answer those as well. So as Dick mentioned, I've had the pleasure to live and work in a large number of countries around the world. I'm Canadian, and when you hear me say out, you'll be able to say, ah, there's that Canadian there. But I'm a little bit unhappy to say I've never spent more than 2 weeks in my home country over the last probably 25 years, just because I've spent all my time doing this. I've worked in the US, and my first job in the US was in Wisconsin, which for a Canadian was like going to a foreign country. Very different culture there. And then I moved to Japan, where my daughter was born, and then back to the Midwest, where I had a global responsibility for S.C. Johnson. And then I moved with Coke to Russia and was responsible for Russia, Kazakhstan, and Moldova. Go find that on a map. And then I moved to South Africa, where I was responsible for marketing in South Africa and all the African countries along the East Coast, including the Maldives, which was not a hardship post. And then finally moved to London, where I was responsible for marketing for Europe, Eurasia, and the Middle East. And then headquarters at Coke called me back, kicking and screaming to the center, to the mothership, and I did come back. And then just about 3 years ago, I moved to Newell Rubbermaid to take responsibility for global businesses there in the consumer arena. And I'm going to be taking examples from my Coke days, my SEJ days, as well as my Newell Rubbermaid days to illustrate some of the points we want to make. To that end, this is the list of brands that I've worked on, and many more than that. Some of which were global when I took them over, some of which I had to take global, some of which I had to actually pull out of countries. So a large number of brands and a lot of experience in building those around the world. Why am I telling you this? Well, I wanted to give you a little bit of a proof point that I have some experience in this international arena, and hopefully you'll be able to listen with to what I say and learn something. So that's what this was all about. As I said, I've decided not to do a lecture type, and this is my only professorial type slide. How many of you here are in the marketing function or discipline? Yeah? So a good number. Well, what I thought I'd do, given I'm going to be talking about branding, that I take just one slide to make sure we level set for everyone what we mean by a brand, and specifically what we mean by a global brand. So what is a brand? A brand is a promise, a collection of expectations and perceptions in the mind of your consumer. So what's a global brand? Well, it's pretty well the same thing, except that it has to transcend cultural origins to develop strong relationships with consumers around the world. It has to maintain some similarities in these different countries, but it may not have a completely consistent face, and that's important, and you'll hear why a little bit later. One thing that I want to take a minute to talk about before I get into international branding, which is quite interesting, it's becoming very germane today. Be careful your reputation precedes you. It's amazing now with the advent of the internet how many brands are actually well known in markets that we haven't sold them. So I'll give you a specific example. When we were looking to take Sharpie into Brazil a couple of years ago, we did something called an awareness study, awareness and usage study. And we asked people, did they know the brand Sharpie? And we found out that anywhere between 15 and 20% of the people we tested knew the brand Sharpie. We had not sold one marker in Brazil, and yet they were aware of it. They could have found it out through the internet, virally, through travel, somebody brought them something. You don't know. But it is critical to realize that there is no such thing really as a local brand these days. In fact, Hayes Roth, who is a gentleman who is in Landor Associates, which is a marketing consultancy firm, he said, thanks to the internet, it's hard to keep your brand just localized. Once you're on the web, you're pretty much anywhere in the world. It doesn't make you a global brand, but you have to be mindful of the implications. And I say amen to that. The implications mean if your brand on the web is picked up in a negative manner, you're working from behind when you enter that country. The opposite is also true. If you've got a good reputation on the web, then you've got some wind in your sails and you can have easier going. So just something to keep in mind. Let's talk about the first thing that you need to keep in mind when you're going internationally. And that is, you have to establish if in fact there is a need for the product. And that isn't as easy as it may seem. I'm going to use Ziploc, which is a brand that's for zippered bags, plastic bags that you use to reseal or store things in. And I'm going to tell you a story about when we took Ziploc international. So back in 1997-98, SC Johnson was looking to acquire a number of brands from Dow Chemical, one of which was Ziploc bags, right? And I was on the acquisition team, so I was responsible for assessing the size of the zippered bag market around the world, and most specifically in the emerging markets, because there was no penetration of the brand down there, or around the world. And we thought, okay, we can do this sitting in Racine, Wisconsin. Your first assessment would be, this would be huge. There are so many people in the emerging markets. And you say, well, and a lot of these people are pretty low income. So that must mean that they're interested in having an effective way of storing their food, right? It's all about value and making sure that you can store your food effectively. So probably a good opportunity for us. Well, the good news was part of this assessment meant I got on a plane and went to these markets around the world. So I was in Asia, I was in the Philippines, you can sort of see that on the map. I went to Africa and spent time there, and I was in Latin America as well. And I found some things that was really eye-opening to us. Number one, in many markets around the world, remember this is 97, 98, in many, many markets around the world, people were shopping day to day, sometimes meal to meal. So the idea of leftovers, not a big problem for them. And when you think about the key premise of Ziploc, which was about a superior seal so that it prevents freezer burn, not a big problem for these people. So number one, not the opportunity we thought. Also, I walked the streets. I looked at the stores. I talked to the customers that we would have been selling to. There were a tremendous number of alternatives in the market, low-cost alternatives. People were reusing their food containers, right? Margarine containers, soup containers. As well, you could go anywhere and find very, very inexpensive, non-zippered plastic bags, which guess what? They use the big technology of tying it with a string. Very cost-effective for them to use. And last but not least, we did what was something called focus groups, right? We got people in and we just talked to them about the category and the product and got their point of view. And we found that even with the people who had expressed an interest in a zippered bag at a premium cost, their plan was to take that bag, wash it out, and reuse it over and over and over again. So what that meant was we had to calibrate our expectations on the size of the market. Our first assessment, huge market, lots of people, storing food is important. Second assessment, maybe not so much. So we calibrated it. We changed our business focus and we started to look at countries where weekly plus shopping was becoming the norm. And obviously the higher income levels where freezing food so that you could use it later was important. That's where we started to put our focus on when we entered the market. It didn't mean that we didn't go in. What it meant was we just had to size the market appropriately so we had the right plan and we put the right level of spending behind that plan. So that was Ziploc in international. Second thing you have to think about is you've got a market need. Does your product really fit the market? Does it satisfy the consumer's need? Well, I'll tell you a story about my first real international assignment other than Wisconsin, and that was when I was in Japan in 1992. And I was responsible for household products, which included air fresheners. Now, I can tell you from experience that people need air fresheners everywhere in the world. So I didn't have to do a market assessment on that. But what I had to do was size the opportunity of a particular product that we had ready for launch at S.C. Johnson. The product was called Glade Touch and Fresh. And basically what this was an aerosol that was in a plastic container that you would put on a countertop, press the top of it, and it released a microscopic amount of spray into the air with really tiny particle sizes. And why that's important is that those particles would stay suspended in the air, and therefore they would cover odor longer. Okay, nice innovation. The product had been launched in Europe and it was really a big success. So they thought, great, let's take it around the world and Japan's going to be the next market. So, good marketing manager that I was, I took this product from Europe, which by the way had a 15% fragrance load, and it's important for you to remember that number. And we did in-home placements, and we gave them to people in apartments, in traditional homes, in new construction. And then we brought these people back in and talked to them, another focus group. And boy, did I find some stuff out there. What we found out was that the product worked well. In fact, it worked too well. This product was so strong that we had one lady who lived in an apartment who said her neighbors were complaining every time she pressed the button. Because remember those lingering air particles? We were fragrancing apartment blocks. Not a good idea. So we dropped the fragrance load to 5%. And what we said was, okay, we're ready to go. We'll do another round of testing. And headquarters said, no, 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 you got to hit the launch time now, because one of the interesting things in Japan is that there are windows where you can launch into supermarkets. So it was this one, or you're going to have to wait a year. Okay, so 5%, let's go. So we launched it. And I'm happy to say it was probably, no, it was my very first big international failure. And I mean, the reason I say I'm happy is because very early in my career, I learned some very valuable lessons. The first was, you absolutely need to ensure that the product performance works in the local context. That's critical. Number two, you have to listen to your local team. My brand managers were saying, Penny-san, this is too strong. But the guys in R&D back at headquarters were saying, no, 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 5% will be great, no problem. Didn't listen to the local team. They understood the problem here. And the third one had to do with headquarters. What I learned was it's really, really hard to convince the guys back in HQ that in fact this beloved product's not going to sell in your market. And you have to be able to stand up to that and have the data to support your proposition. I didn't. I was pretty new in the international arena, and I had people telling me, no way, your data's wrong, well, let's go with it, I'm sure the in-market will make a difference. Not true. The consumer voted with her feet, and that was she was running out of the room where this product was. There is a happy ending to that story, however. Very shortly thereafter, we launched a line extension called Toilet No Touch and Fresh. And what we did was we redesigned the product, made it very small. Rather than sitting on a countertop, you could affix it to the side of the toilet. You press the bottom of it, and we dropped the fragrance load to 1%. And guess what? This product did a great job in what are, in Japan, very tiny, very smelly toilet rooms. And the product is still selling there today. So the lesson learned here is make sure your product actually delivers against the need that the consumer has. And if it doesn't, what we learned with the second launch was find a need, because chances are there is something out there for you. Okay, that's Glade Toilet Touch and Fresh in Japan. The third thing you have to really think about is your competition. It's critical for establishing yourself in a global arena. And I'm going to use an example from Newell Rubbermaid back in 2008, when they were looking to launch the food containers into Brazil. The team at Newell had done some great work. They really had. They had assessed the market size, they had evaluated the competition, and they had tested the product thoroughly. It actually delivered against the consumer's expectations in Brazil. The competitive set, as you can sort of see up here in this chart, for Rubbermaid at the premium price positioning was Tupperware, which is similar to what you have here, sold direct to consumers through parties, and then a local brand called Sanremo Floor. Good quality local brand. Tupperware had a huge business in Brazil. That's one of the reasons why the company was interested in entering into it. They sold over $180 million annually, and they had hundreds of distributors and literally thousands of resellers. They were focused up in the north of the country of Brazil, and they were really strong in C and D class cities. So these are cities with a predominance of lower socioeconomic homes. So for reference, families with C and D class homes earn about $300 to $600 a month. And for counterbalance, families that are in A homes can earn anywhere between $4,000 to $7,000 a month. So wide income disparity in Brazil. So the team thought, okay, Tupperware is going to sell to the lower income homes, north of Brazil, direct sale, parties. Rubbermaid, differentiating himself, we're going to go after higher end consumers, the A-class consumers, through the modern trade. Great. Total separate marketing campaigns. Well, the team sold it into retailers like Walmart. There's a similar mass market retailer down there called Pão de Açúcar. They also sold it to some high-end grocery stores. Sold it in, put it at the shelf, looked pretty, and then it sat and sat and sat. And we had to figure out what had gone wrong. And here's what we didn't know. Tupperware's success in Brazil was actually not about the product they were selling, or not predominantly about that. It was because they were giving lower income women, predominantly, the opportunity to start their own business and supplement their wages. Number two, we learned that the parties were absolutely critical to the selling of this product. Why? Because it's peer-to-peer selling. And I know that you guys are probably reading about the internet nowadays and how important it is, a reference from the network of friends. And in fact, they're finding that nowadays, traditional media is very unlikely to convert someone to buy something versus word of mouth or your network's endorsement. Same thing was happening in Brazil with these parties. The people were being trained on what the benefit was of this product, and there was even some peer pressure for them to buy. We also found out that a reseller would sell to someone who then would turn over and sell it to someone again. So it was a real different business model that was making Tupperware successful versus simply having a great product. So our product in large stores had very little conversion. Add to that a very high price point because we had to bring the product into Brazil, and the customs and duties in Brazil is very, very high. And we just didn't have a recipe for success. The local player that I mentioned, Sanremo Floor, who was in the modern trade, they were probably half the price of our product, Rubbermaid product. And the other thing that kind of was a kicker for us was that our point of differentiation with Rubbermaid was we had a great seal, container, lots of different sizes, and guess what? We don't stain. That's a very first world kind of benefit when people are just starting to buy plastic containers. The fact that Sanremo's product had a great seal and it was half the price, that was enough for them. So the lesson was learned. Understand what makes your competitors successful so that your entry strategies actually have a chance to be successful as well. Last example, there's another Brazil story that I'll relate, and this one I was personally involved in. I mentioned earlier that we were looking at taking Sharpie and Papermate into Brazil. We were taking the writing business into Brazil, and we hadn't been in Brazil with this portfolio ever. And so we thought, okay, let's give it a shot. It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge market. It's an up-and-coming market. And the point of this story is that you really have to understand both your supply chain and your go-to-market. You can have the greatest brands in the world, and we did, but our supply chain and our go-to-market strategy was what really was the Achilles heel of this plan. When we started to plan the launch into Brazil, we had planned to hook up with another distributor there, or actually another manufacturer of children products. So this company made children's paints as well as art supplies. We were going to partner with them, use their distribution, which was perfect. We'd be working with someone who understand the marketplace, had relationships with the trade. We could get in and we'd be golden. Well, unfortunately, the best laid plans and all, the relationship didn't work out. And so we were faced with a situation that we had to build our own go-to-market route. We had to build our own infrastructure. We had to do that in a pretty quick period of time. So we thought, okay, we can do this. First, we have to understand what it takes to bring product into the market. So we did a really good assessment of customs and duties and planned that all out and got the right paperwork done. And then we said, what's going to be our distribution approach? In Brazil, you predominantly have little mom and pops that sell pencils one at a time. And then you have stationary wholesalers that supply those moms and pops. You have general wholesalers. They're the guys that handle covering all the supermarkets around the country. And then you had a couple of the big multinationals like Auchan and Walmart. That was the makeup of the office products business in Brazil. Okay, so we went out and hired a whole field sales force and sat back and said, we've got to build a plan to compete. And I didn't mention, but our competitor in Brazil was BIC. Rather a large multinational, and it had about 80% market share. So we weren't going in with an easy task at hand. Still, we were confident because we had done the research. We knew we had the right product. We had the right pricing, even though the P&L looked not so great. But we said we'll price it for entry, and then we'll take our profits later on. And we had built out what we thought was a really kick-ass sales force. So we were ready to roll. Well, here's what happened. It took us 3 extra months to get the product actually into the country. Now that was an issue because, like North America, there's a back-to-school season, and you have to sell the product before that for them to get it into the retailers. And we were getting perilously close to back-to-school season. So of course that made the retailers more than a little nervous about this newcomer who can't even get the product into the country. We had great acceptance with stationary wholesalers. We know that business. So we got pretty good distribution in the mom and pop. But we couldn't crack the general wholesalers, and we could not crack the big box retailers. Even though our initial assessment, we had talked to some of these people, and they were very eager to have a competitor to BIC to come into the marketplace. You know, competition is good for the retailer. When push came to shove and they had to give up space on the shelf for somebody they didn't know, it's not worth it to them. So the fact was, we didn't get the distribution that we needed or had planned for. Now the second surprise for us was in the marketing front. Papermate, which was the brand we thought was going to have a really hard time because we had this big gorilla called BIC sitting there, did very well. In fact, we were pleasantly surprised that it exceeded our expectations where we had distribution. Sharpie, on the other hand, was a disaster. Why is that? No competitor. Why would we have that problem? Well, the fact of the matter is Sharpie's positioning, its proposition, is self-expression, right? And to do self-expression well, you actually have to have lots and lots of colors and different tip sizes. Well, because this was a new brand in Brazil, the retailer said, no, we'll take blue, black, red. Not very expressive. So the proposition that we were promising to the consumer, they actually couldn't get at retail. Big problem. We also didn't have the right distribution for the professional side of the business. So distribution really was the Achilles heel for that launch. Now, good news is, while it wasn't a success at the beginning, we've taken that learning and we've gone back into Brazil, and we've got a much better plan, and we've got a much better relationship with our distributors to be able to cover more of what we needed to do. And that's an important point to make here. When you go into international, there's a really good chance you're not going to get everything right. Sometimes you get nothing right when you first get in there. But you have to try again, because really victor goes to the one who works hardest. And if you've got an opportunity you've identified and you've got a good proposition, if one piece of the business plan doesn't work, go back in and try again. So that was a good learning for the company. So let's recap some of the lessons that I've learned. Insights, insights, insights. Insights, really critical. You notice I'm not saying facts. I have a saying that I use with my staff a lot, which is facts are our friends, and they are our friends. The reality is facts don't make decisions. In fact, they don't make good decisions. Facts are just facts. Insights about the facts make good decisions. Insights are the so what associated with facts. And that is what's going to make the difference between a good plan and a not good plan. So when you think about consumers and customers and shoppers, they're different everywhere in the world. And you have to understand that through digging into what their attitudes, their behaviors, their conventions, and their desires are. Understand that from a factual basis. Pull the insights. So what? What does that mean for my business proposition? And then go forward with a plan. If you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. Taking an existing plan, or meaning something you've launched here in North America, or taking something that you know to be true, sitting here in North Georgia, and then trying to apply that to another part of the world with different consumers or shoppers or customers, that's not going to work. I'm sure you've all heard the horror stories, right? You've heard about a big major retailer who will not be named launching into Germany with home goods, and it was a disaster because guess what? The pillowcases didn't fit European-sized pillows. Oops, mistake there. Another one, inappropriate use of color. You know, I've got up here packaging and logo. You have to think about this. White signals purity in a large part of the world. White is associated with death in Japan. You can use it, but understand that it has this duality of meaning. You have to know that when you're going in. You may have heard some success stories about people having done this well. I think somebody from Coke has spoken here, and certainly Dick talks about Coke. When we were launching Diet Coke or Coke Light with lemon a few years ago, we had to change the flavor profile of the lemon. In the United States, the preference is for a very sweet candy taste. That's the lemon. In Europe, the preference is for a lemon taste that actually tastes like lemon. And I fought headquarters long and hard for them to realize that we needed to do a different formulation for that part of the world. Another example that I had, which is kind of old, this commercial would have been well before any of you were born, but it's for a brand called Mr. Muscle, which I'd worked on way back in the day. And this product is a household cleaner, and its core proposition is that it's a strong product that does the work for you. Well, we had to take that product and put it into a couple of places in the world and create a commercial for it. This was back in the day when TV ads worked. And what we had was, in the United States, Mr. Muscle was this big, hulky guy, and he helped to clean the kitchen. In Poland, Mr. Muscle was this little skinny dude with the product. You say, how does that work? Well, what it really was showing was the difference in humor in two parts of the world. In the United States, people are pretty literal, and the commercials had to be very literal. In Poland, people understood the irony of having a weak man using a strong product. Both were very successful. The brand was very strong in both of those markets. But if we had taken the Mr. Muscle Hulk into Poland, they would have gone, what is that about? And vice versa. So it's really about understanding the culture and the mores and the behaviors, the attitudes, the desires in the local market that'll make a difference. I was at a conference just last week with a number of women, and I asked Marissa Drew, who basically runs Credit Suisse in the UK, and I said, I'm going to be speaking to a whole room full of students who are interested in international branding. What advice would you give them? And her comment was, which I thought was catchy, was bounce it before you announce it. In other words, if you have a plan, test it. This could be through classic market research, right? Putting it into people's hands, filling out forms. It could be doing a small-scale test, whether it's in a country or in a region. It could be doing a beta test. It could be doing something online. Heck, it could be even just giving it to a group of your friends for them to use it. But test it. Make sure that you're actually doing something with this product and talking about that product in an appropriate manner. One group that I think people tend to forget in terms of testing is talking to customers. Customers probably are one of the best sources of consumer insights. These guys are at the coalface. They interact with consumers. They're reading data about consumers, what they buy, what preferences they have, the trends in the data, faster than you are. It really makes sense for you, if you're going international, to develop relationships, very good ongoing win-win business building kind of relationships with your core customers in different parts of the world, so you have access to that data. You need that data. And for the most part, your customers want to work with you because your success is their success and their success is your success, right? It's a positive reinforcement loop. So customers, and then of course there's all the classic research that you should be doing before you do any major launch. So bounce it before you announce it. Which actually brings me to the next one, which is nothing beats research until it's wrong, right? And that's mine, because I've done the research and it's been wrong. Well, the fallacy is that research makes your decision. Research is the input to the decision. And that was something that I had to learn along the way. So do your research, talk to your consumers, but at the end of the day, you have to have a little bit of faith in the idea that you have and actually go forward with it. I think a lot of the technology companies would tell you this. I think I read this about Apple, that in fact they don't do focus groups. And the reason for that is, if you were to sit a group of consumers in 5 years ago and say, do you need an iPad? Chances are they would say no, because they can only contextualize solutions in the environment that they're currently in. We all know how successful the iPad is today. So do the research, but don't be so reliant on it that it overwhelms your common sense or it overwhelms your vision for the product and the brand ahead. I'm almost there. Last lesson, or second to last lesson, is listen to your local team. I would say all of my successes in my career have been because I was able to listen to a good local team. When you go into a country, make one assumption only, and that's you are going to be wrong. You're the foreigner there. there's a really good chance that they're going to know the consumer, the market environment, the business environment, the retailers way better than you. And if you don't take that in and go in with the intent to learn and listen to these people, you're going to just make the same mistakes over and over again. And that's why at the beginning of the presentation, when I said I was happy to make that error early in my career, it's because I learned a valuable lesson. Close, listen. One mouth, two ears. It really makes sense when you're working internationally. But one of the things that I should say is it's often difficult to find a good local team, especially if you're building from scratch. We thought we had a great local team in Brazil, and we found out that in fact, some of the skills that we were relying on, they hadn't built them. When we built our teams in China, and certainly back in the day when I was working in Russia, it was very difficult for us to find people who had actually learned about brands. They didn't build brands there. You had one choice, here it is, off you go. So it's in those cases, that's usually when head office starts to send people over to train people. You notice I'm saying train them, not necessarily to do the work, because again, the locals understand the market. They may need somebody to help them think it through in the same kind of discipline as you've learned, that you guys are learning in your classes today. So listen to your local team, understand what they're saying, and then apply your judgment to it. So, can you build an international brand? Absolutely. But I prefer that to say that we're building global brands. Locally relevant brands that are global. A global brand can be extremely efficient when it comes to entering a market, but only if it's actually relevant. If it's not relevant, a global brand is the most inefficient thing that you could be saddled with. I'll give you an example of when we've done that well. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a brand called Parker, which is a fine writing implement. I wonder how many of you actually have a pen, right? Yes? There's a few of us that still use pens. Well, internationally, fine writing implements are still very, very appealing in their sense of a status symbol. And we wanted to penetrate into China, which of course was a great market for us, because not only are there lots and lots of people, but there was an emerging middle class, and as their socioeconomics changed, they had a real desire to have status symbols. And I don't mean a Ferrari, I mean things that signal day to day that they're making it in the world. And the fine writing implement is one of the ways to do that. Thank goodness for Parker. So we took Parker into China, and we didn't change the proposition. Parker in China stands for quality writing, authentic, and a superior image. What we did do was we changed how we market it. So for example, a fountain pen in China has a different nib than a fountain pen that you would buy here. In Western world, we write and the pen is on an angle. In China, where they're writing characters, the pen is much more vertical. So we changed the nib. That was a modification to make sure that the product fit the consumer's need. We also changed our merchandising standards because they had newly emerging